Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 1009 of the Trump administration. And as another genuinely consequential week came to an end, the Democrats were handed a substantial victory by a federal judge in what now appears to be their steady march to articles of impeachment. Judge Beryl Howell, the chief federal judge sitting in Washington, ruled the impeachment inquiry is, in fact, a legal proceeding, undercutting the president's argument that the investigation is illegitimate and throwing out the White House counsel's argument along the same lines. The judge also ruled the Justice Department must release certain grand jury materials gathered as part of the Mueller investigation to the House Judiciary Committee by next Wednesday. We also learned today that President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, could be among the next witnesses to speak to Congress, and that'll be an event. The New York Times reports, quote, impeachment investigators have negotiated in recent days with a lawyer for Mr. Bolton about a date for him to be deposed behind closed doors, according to two people briefed on the matter. Times goes on to say leaders in the House are preparing for the next stage, high-profile public hearings that could begin as early as mid-November and feature hours of testimony damaging to the president. Among the star witnesses who could deliver explosive public testimony in front of live television cameras could be John Bolton. Earlier today, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, talked about the significance of such an event.
If you hear from someone like that in a deposition or even in public testimony, you cannot ignore it. The GOP defense of Trump will have a shelf life. They will be unable to sustain this process-oriented defense, this defense that they're attacking the credibility of good career public servants. That has a shelf life. That can't keep going once the facts take over. And when someone like Bolton testifies to his dismay over potential unethical or illegal activity, Trump loses, and he loses big.
In the meantime, the president's Senate allies are trying to provide air cover for their man, the president. Senator Lindsey Graham's resolution condemning the House impeachment inquiry now has the support from 50 Senate Republicans. The president referenced that during an event in South Carolina today with Senator Graham.
Somebody just said, Lindsey, we're up to 50 already, and I haven't even made a phone call. 50 out of 53. And they said, you get to 40, that's pretty good if you haven't done anything. But we're up to 50. I don't know if you've heard that, Lindsey. Did you hear that? Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott. Could you please stop? All I can say is thank goodness they're on my side. Because if they weren't, I'd have big trouble, right?
3 GOP senators have still not endorsed this resolution. Mitt Romney of Utah, Lisa Murkowski, Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine. Over on the House side, Democrats are moving full speed ahead with their impeachment inquiry tomorrow. And yes, a rare Saturday session. Acting Assistant Secretary of European and Eurasian Affairs, Philip Rieker, will be deposed. This follows the most eventful testimony yet, and that was from Ambassador Bill Taylor, a 50-year public servant who is the one guy who tied Trump to the Ukrainian pressure campaign. There's also some odd news today concerning this man, Rudy Giuliani. There is no elegant way to put this, but he butt-dialed an NBC News reporter last week, inadvertently leaving a voicemail message that no one was supposed to hear, on which he could be heard discussing the need for a large amount of cash.
Tomorrow, I got to get you to get on Bahrain. You got to call. Got to call Robert again tomorrow. Is Robert around? The problem is, we need some money. We need $200,000.
The context of the entire conversation is not clear. In other portions of the call, Giuliani can be heard criticizing the Bidens. Meanwhile, Washington Post reports tonight President Trump is not happy as the White House struggles to fight this inquiry. Our next guest, Carol Leonnig, has co-authored a piece with Josh Dawsey in the paper that says, in part, the president is increasingly frustrated that his efforts to stop people from cooperating with the probe so far have collapsed under the weight of legally powerful congressional subpoenas, advisors said. Earlier today, the president dismissed the need for help in fighting impeachment.
Here's the thing.
I don't have teams. Everyone's talking about teams. I'm the team. I did nothing wrong.
Here for our leadoff discussion on a Friday night, Jeff Bennett, White House correspondent for NBC News, the aforementioned Carol Leonnig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for The Washington Post, and Phil Elliott, politics correspondent for Time Magazine. Good evening and welcome to you all. Carol, I'd like to begin with you. Are we being led to believe that the lack of a strategy is the strategy, that ad-libbing is going to be the way this goes?
I'm a little concerned about the lack of a strategy, how little time it takes to figure out what it is. What I learned in the last couple of days with my great colleague Josh Dawsey is that the White House strategy does boil down to the president's viewpoint. He helped dictate a letter from the White House counsel's office arguing why a probe of his interactions with the Ukraine president was unnecessary, and the administration wouldn't cooperate with it. He has been reluctant to believe that this impeachment inquiry would proceed and gather evidence, and it is gathering evidence and steam and snowballing. He was also arguing that there was no way they needed anybody to really help him because he was the best arbiter of whether or not this was serious, and he decided that it was not serious. But that is changing the last few days, and the president has agreed they need to beef up their legal team, and they need to get somebody on communications, a real strategy for communicating what is the president's story, because the president's original story has not stood up to the testimony from his own administration officials.
Hey, Jeff, we often call political opinion polls a snapshot in time, often knowing that by the time we broadcast them, sometimes the facts on the ground have changed and the sample would have already changed. Is that the same as a sense of the Senate resolution that doesn't have any enforcement teeth? Is this convertible to any support, or are those Senate votes indeed moving targets in the weeks to come?
I think they're absolutely moving targets, Brian, and here's why. I was at that press conference where Lindsey Graham unveiled that resolution. I will tell you this, and this is important context. That resolution was advertised earlier in the afternoon as being a resolution aimed at condemning the entire impeachment process. By the time that press conference rolled around, Graham was clear that this was really only about attacking the process, not the underlying substance of the issue. In fact, he said, I'm not even saying President Trump did anything wrong. I'm just saying that the process should be handled publicly. And when we pressed him and we said, you know, you have senators who will, in effect, be jurors in a Senate trial once the House moves articles of impeachment off the House floor, if that is in fact what happens, aren't you in effect poisoning the well of jurors, having them come out in support of this resolution aimed at criticizing the ongoing impeachment inquiry? And he said, this isn't about the substance, this is all about the politics. And so what happens, this followed President Trump earlier in the day. A group of senators had met with President Trump, and I'm told that President Trump made clear to them that he wanted his chief defenders on the Hill to basically step their game up. So we saw earlier this week how House Republicans, a group of them, stormed the secure area in the House side. And on the Senate side, you had Lindsey Graham, President Trump's chief defender in the Senate, introducing this resolution.
Phil, the Democrats seem to sense the need to conduct some hearings out loud with television cameras in the room. Run us through your knowledge of their next moves.
So I was on the Hill this afternoon speaking with people in the room as the Democratic House members are plotting their next steps. They're taking their cues from Speaker Pelosi, who wants a fast but responsible process here. And eventually, the Republicans are going to get their way. There are going to be hearings. There are going to be public votes. And we're going to hear in public the testimony that really turned Washington on its head. A lot of Republicans, after hearing Ambassador Taylor, were pretty spooked and were asking themselves, OK, we're fighting about having open hearings. Are we sure we want those? Well, they're going to come. The problem is we're not sure on timeline right now. Every new piece of testimony brings new evidence, new witnesses, new potential instances of wrongdoing. the question for the speaker and her team is how wide of an aperture do we want to go here, or do we keep it narrow and focus solely on the phone calls with Ukraine? It's going to be very tempting for Democrats to try to write a book when a sentence is really all they need to do here.
Carol Leonnig, for those of us who enjoy reading legal writings, it is a sight to behold when a senior federal judge appointed for life gets angry, as was the case with Judge Howell's ruling today. But tell us what's next. It can't be the last word in Washington, D.C., can it?
I doubt it will be the last word, Brian, and you're wise to ask that question. But the importance of Judge Howell's order today can't be underestimated. She said what a series of lawyers have concluded themselves. Lawyers for witnesses who've all been filing one by one into a secure basement room in a House office building and giving their first-person accounts of what they knew about the president's role in pressuring the Ukraine to dig up dirt on his Democratic rivals. And what she has essentially said is, give me a break. The Department of Justice is wrong. Their legal arguments are flawed and weak, and nobody believes that. Nobody with a law degree believes that you can argue a House impeachment process is not authorized and you don't have to cooperate with it. That's already happening right in front of our eyes. Another 3 witnesses have been subpoenaed from OMB and other places. There are more to come, 9 in the rearview mirror. And it strikes me, Brian, as important to know that when Charles Cooperman's lawsuit moves forward, it will answer the question about whether a senior White House advisor may be able to testify about what they have witnessed, which Charles Cooperman can argue he is, but it will not stop the 5 witnesses who are named by one witness that are being now asked, oh, you have corroborating information? Can you come in? Those people are from agencies, and nothing stops them from being compelled to come before Congress.
Jeff Bennett, when historians like John Meacham, who is coming up later on in this broadcast, sit down to write the history of this era, what's the chance that this week we've just witnessed in terms of mechanical moves toward getting us to possible and eventual articles of impeachment lands on the top 10 most consequential weeks of 2019?
This week was certainly consequential because what House investigators are now stitching together is this tapestry of evidence and testimony. And you have diplomat after diplomat all providing investigators chapters of this same narrative. And so what we've now learned is that Rudy Giuliani was not just freelancing in Ukraine, he was advancing one of President Trump's stated goals. That is the testimony of Bill Taylor. We know from Kurt Volker's testimony and others that as Rudy Giuliani was running this pressure campaign outside of the typical conduit, the State Department channel, officials who raised concerns, legitimate concerns, had no idea what he was up to and asked questions about it, Marie Yovanovitch among them. Once they started doing that, they were targeted by smear campaigns that Rudy Giuliani was behind. We know that based on the State Department Inspector General. And so what was the point of this pressure campaign? It was to get Ukraine's leader, so goes the theory of the case, to manufacture damaging information about the Bidens. That is the very simple story that Democrats are building. That's the public case for this entire impeachment effort. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that what President Trump has already admitted to, what already exists in the public record, that in itself is an impeachable offense. It is a crime for any U.S. person, any American, to solicit anything of value from a foreign national in connection with the U.S. election. What Democrats are doing right now behind closed doors, this is their fact-finding process. They're getting the view from the White House, getting the view from the State Department, getting the view from Ukraine as to what was happening before and after this call. So when you hear President Trump say the call was perfect, Lindsey Graham says, I told President Trump there was nothing wrong with the call. That's not really the issue. Democrats have said, and some Republicans, for that matter, have said that the call did not exist in isolation. There was a lot of advance work that led up to it and a lot of follow-up work after the fact. And so that's the case that Democrats are building right now in private, but we expect in a few weeks that they're going to have public hearings to bring that all out to the fore.
Okay, Philip, let's theoretically fast forward and talk for a minute, if you will, about the kind of pressure members of the Senate are going to be under if they indeed sit as jurors. We're going to hear the phrase on this broadcast and all day long for weeks at a time, this is a vote for your grandchildren. And they're going to be able to run, but many of them aren't going to be able to hide.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough for people like Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Ben Sass. The list goes on. I mean, especially for members who are retiring like Lamar Alexander, what is his legacy here? This is going to be very important for them. It's also going to be very problematic if you're running for president and one of these senators, because you're going to be sidelined by this trial 6 days a week at 1 p.m. There are 6 of them, including some of the front runners, who are going to be stuck in Washington and not in Iowa if this thing goes into the new year, as it increasingly looks like it's going to happen. They're basically going to have to concede Iowa, or at least the ground in Iowa, to Vice President Biden, Mayor Buttigieg. It gets really tough there. You talk to them and the people around them. They say, you know what? This impeachment trial is more important than the Iowa caucuses, and they're making a bet that they'll be able to raise enough money off appearances on shows like this network broadcasts after the trial ends, that they'll be able to convert appearances on cable into fundraising to pay for the ads to offset their absence in Iowa and New Hampshire. That said, it's a small fraction of the delegates that will be awarded heading into Super Tuesday at the beginning of March. So the race might reset at that point.
Well, we're especially indebted tonight for our big 3 Washington journalists, all for choosing us over the World Series. Jeff Bennett, Philip Elliott, and Carol Leonnig. Our thanks for coming on and joining us, as always.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.